Welcome to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm speaking to you from New York City on the first day of June, 2021. I want to thank each of you for listening to the show, making it one of the more popular shows in the Voice America Business Channel. I also want to invite you to keep your comments, whatever they may be, positive, negative, or neutral. Send them on to questionsfortaylor@gmail.com. Questions, the number 4, taylor@gmail.com. And, of course, we do want to thank our sponsors for making the show economically viable. This week's sponsors are Novo Resources, Sitka Gold Corp, El Oro Resources, Irving Resources, Hannon Metals, Firefox Gold, Lion One Metals, and SK Mining Corp. I've titled today's show, Inflation? No worries, says David Rosenberg. So David Rosenberg will be a guest in the second half of the hour, and Dr. Quentin Henning joins me after the first commercial break, and Eric Coffin is with me momentarily. He'll be giving some of his thoughts on the markets. Well, many investors believe a rising CPI in America is a serious economic threat. David Rosenberg thinks these worries are very much overblown. He says that what's going on isn't a fundamental shift, but rather a pendulum swing back to the opposite extreme following the sudden deflationary demand shock caused by the pandemic. Rosenberg argues that the supply and demand factors that have led to the highest core inflation since 1982 have evolved from unique circumstances related to the pandemic, and that they are already starting to fade. We'll ask David to support those views and perhaps throw a couple of contrary ideas his way as well to see what he has to say. And as I said, he'll be with me in the second half of the hour. Quentin Henning will join me right after the first commercial break to comment on El Oro Resources' his May 26 report of a 123.6 meter drill intercept grading 122.7 grams per ton silver equivalent on El Oro's Isca property in Bolivia. We'll want to hear what Quentin has to say about that, the significance of that, as well as prior drilling that's gone on now, and I think they've found a second breccia pipe that is mineralized with all sorts of metals, and we want to hear what Quentin's thoughts are now on that project. So he'll be with me after the first commercial break. But right now I'm happy to tell you that Eric Coffin is with me to share some of his insights into the markets that we pay most attention to on this show. Eric, along with Scott Gibson, is the co-founder of the Metals Investor Forum, and he is also the author of one of the best market letters for investors in junior mineral exploration stocks, and his views on the markets are always insightful, which is why I'm really happy that he's with me today. And I should say that you can go to hraadvisory.com to sign up for Eric's very reasonably priced newsletter. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me, as always. Happy June.
Yeah, happy June to you, and it is a happier June than some of those in the past, given the kinds of things that you and I are invested in, that's for sure. But this troubling to a lot of people, this CPI number that was a shock to the markets, the April CPI numbers. And as I mentioned, we're expecting David Rosenberg. He'll be, unless he's really changed his mind suddenly, telling us not to worry. CPI is no big deal. It's higher than expected right now, but it's due to unusual circumstances. What are your thoughts on that issue that seems to be the issue of the day?
I guess it's probably not a great answer, but I guess I'm on the fence, but probably leaning in Rosie's direction when it comes to inflation. I mean, I agree. Like a lot of the April numbers, the May numbers that are coming. I mean, I wrote 3 or 4 months ago, look, we're going to get this big bounce in the next 2 or 3 months. A lot of this is base effects, so don't panic. I don't think it's 100% base effects. There's definitely been a lot of demand increases certainly in some of the things that are near and dear to us, like metals, which of course is great for resource stocks. But really, you add all that stuff up, it doesn't really account for that much of the CPI. I do agree there's some suspicious accounting, the whole owner equivalent rent. Maybe Rosie can comment on that, because I've always found that a little bit odd, because it's housing prices are clearly rising much faster than owner equivalent rent. But all of that said, I do think a lot of this I think we are still dealing with a lot of supply chain issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a higher CPI number again in May, but my expectation is it is actually going to start easing off. And from our perspective, for what matters to you and me in terms of the stocks we follow, one thing that I find interesting is if you look at the last two or three things that have kind of spooked the market momentarily, like CPI or high PMI numbers, I find it quite interesting that the bond market, which generally speaking, let's be honest, is smarter about this stuff than the equity market, hasn't reacted that much to that. And that's actually really good news if you're a commodity and or precious metal investor, because effectively what that means is that the headline inflation number has gone up. Bonds really aren't moving up in yield to meet it, which means interest rates, real interest rates, inflation adjusted, are actually getting more negative, and they've gotten quite a bit more negative in the last 2 months. And that's been a really big underpinning for commodities and for precious metals. And I don't see that, it's going to bounce around, but I think we're going to see negative real rates here for a while, which is great for us.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And one of the really strong correlation, low or negative real rates to gold and silver too, I suppose. I'm just wondering though to what extent those are really market rates, and to what extent the Fed might have its thumb on the scale. I mean, if the markets,
they're buying. I mean, they've been doing a lot of buying. It's not a big secret. Like week in and week out, they're buying. I'm not sure their buying is. I'm not sure it's enough in and of itself to keep the yields down. Although I don't think there's much doubt. The way they talk, it certainly sounds to me like if they had to impose yield curve control, they would. And you can actually make the argument that there is some yield curve control going on right now. And I would certainly go along with the idea that there's debt monetization going on right now. That's QE effectively is debt monetization. That's what they're doing. I mean, they're warehousing at some place in the Fed, but the basic issue here is the debt monetization that Austrian guys like you have worried about and warned about for years. That's pretty much is what they're doing right now. Whatever they may call it, that's what it is. But again, if you're a gold investor, like, yeehaw, go for it, guys.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. Well, I know, Stephen Druckenmüller made the point that, in fact, everything, all these trillions of dollars that are being created out of thin air, essentially that are financing, could not be done if the Fed wasn't in there monetizing. So, but of course, if this is just a temporary thing, and we hope it is, because nobody wants to see any kind of, meltdown or hyperinflation or anything else. So,
ultimately, I think we see stuff get monetized because I don't see how you make the numbers work. I don't think the U.S. populace, as a voting populace, would say, yeah, sure, raise all of our tax rates 30% to pay the debt off. Like they're going to have to find a way to bury it.
Yeah, I don't see how any way but monetization. It seems hard for me to see how that could any other way. So Rosenberg is expecting some commodity price weakness. I mean, we've certainly seen copper rise to tremendous levels. How are you viewing the base metals right now, Eric?
I mean, long term, I'm extremely bullish on copper. I'm extremely bullish on nickel. Copper, just because of the electrification. Nickel, because it's not really that easy to find high-grade nickel deposits. They're actually pretty hard to find. Zinc, I think, will do okay, too. Short term, I think Dave could be right. I'm not expecting anything dramatic, but there are, if you look at the copper space, for instance, there are 3 or 4 very significant size mines that have started production. And I'm kind of watching the credit impulse in China with sort of one eye, because it's weakened significantly. And credit impulse is essentially loan growth. It's lending, and China, as we all know, is an economy that runs on credit. So the fact that that's sort of dived quite a bit, actually, in the last month or two has me a little bit nervous. I don't know if that means we're going to see them slack off on metals purchases. They certainly haven't yet.
Yeah, well, I know that Dave is somewhat bearish on the impact on commodities, I think, from China. So we'll hear what he has to say about that. But Eric, with just 2 minutes left, I don't know if you'd like to share a stock, something you think looks especially attractive right now.
It's a big favorite. The president and I are good personal friends. It's not a big secret of my subscribers that I like it a lot, and that's a company called Sun Summit, which is SMN. On the venture, and SMREF, OTC. They should have more drill results out, I think, next week. They've really changed the whole complexion of their Buck property. They've released a lot more high-grade results than anyone expected from it. It was always kind of a low-grade bulk tonnage thing. Mm-hmm. I like the fact they've drilled in about 10 different directions this phase. They're just trying to get some idea what the edges are. I know from talking to Bob Willis, they really haven't found the edges anywhere, so I'm not expecting bad news, but it just feels to me like that's one that's going to be, I think it's going to be a big story this year. I think it's a long way from being done on that story.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to it. I know you did invite him to the Metals Investor Forum. It's certainly one I've been watching, and bulk mineable story still, though, isn't it? I mean, it's with maybe some high-grade spikes in there.
Yeah, I think if you ask Bob, and Bob is a mining engineer rather than a geologist, I think his answer would be, well, I know because he and I have talked about it. He's like, look, we've got this shallower stuff that it's like this weird, it's this breccia stuff that's, half a gram, 3/4 of a gram. It's kind of right at surface. And then we've got these high-grade things that no one ever hit before, and they're still trying to figure out what's going on and how that's sitting. I think if you asked him, he would say, look, at the end of the day, what's probably going to happen here is we're going to put 500 holes in this thing. We're going to do grade shells, and hopefully somebody bigger is just going to buy us and let them figure out how much is open pit, how much is underground, whether you just dig the whole thing out. They don't know yet, honestly.
Mm-hmm. How much drilling they're going to have to do before they can come up with a resource? Do they have any thoughts about that yet?
They've got another 10 holes to report from this program. I suspect the next program is probably 20 or 30,000 meters, so probably 40 or 50 holes. Even at the end of that, it's just going to depend. If they haven't found the edges yet, I don't think they're going to be in a big rush to do a resource number. And I'm not sure they will have found the edges. The thing just keeps getting bigger as they step out of.
All right. Well, this is one stock to keep an eye on. Again, the name and the symbol, Eric, is
Sun Summit. The symbol on the venture is S. M as in mother, N as in Nancy. On the OTC, it's SMREF.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Eric, so much for sharing those thoughts with our listeners.
Thank you.
Some really good thoughts, and maybe some people will make some money on this one. I think they will. But, I'm betting on it as well. I have some shares myself. All right. Well, thanks, Eric, and we'll look to do it again sometime soon.